19th of March, this is Media Center, you can inform. I'm Svetlana Chiparenko. Let's talk about the fires at oil refineries in the Russian Federation. Mr. Gonchar, Globalistic Strategy 2021. Hello. Hello. Recently, we observe numerous cases of fires happening for various reasons at the Russian refineries. So, what are the financial economic consequences for the Russian Federation? We find ourselves at a certain stage of this war when we start hurting the enemy in its strategic depth. So, talking about the consequences, well, it will take some time to start talking about them. For the time being, there are only intermediate results available. But since there is such a strong media coverage of those occasions, both inside Russia and in the international media, well, that's probably the most painfully heard consequence for Russia. We don't know clear figures of the damage incurred because only the owners of those Russian refineries know the exact figures, but they're not sharing them for obvious reasons. The data available now, and both Russian well, one thing is clear, the biggest oil corporation, the largest giant, Rosneft, the state-run company, average daily refinery of oil products compared with January in the first days of March dropped by 12.65%. So substantial reduction, but not fatal, unfortunately. That's why the Ukrainian drones have job cut for them. Still, the main oil refineries, luckily, are located at a distance that Ukrainian drones can hit. So it's important to stay consistent and keep hitting regularly. You mentioned that even though the level of damage is not fatal, but how many capacities of theirs do we need to destroy to make it painful, if not fatal? Well, it's not about destroying all the Russian oil refinery industry. It's going to be impossible. You need to have bombers and long-range missiles. For the time being, these are like surgery strikes by drones. And those drones, they hit not the refinery at large, but critically important equipment. So you can't claim that if half of those refineries are destroyed, then it becomes fatal. No, the fatality might happen earlier because the oil refinery products are not abstract. We quite know them, what they are. Diesel is the largest product. Benzene, aviation fuel, mazout, whatnot. So, look, Russia now bans export of benzines until September the 1st for half a year. Why? Because in the case of benzines, the situation is close to critical. If we keep hitting them, it will become critical. Unfortunately, it's not yet true for diesel, because they have still room for maneuver. Say, some refineries are not able to produce enough diesel, then you can export from behind Ural mountains, from Omsk or elsewhere. While with benzines, the situation is quite different. That's why the enemy introduced the ban to export benzene for the next 6 months. And the domestic prices in Sadrash on benzines keep growing. But when they say that Ukrainian attacks on Russian oil refinery hits the prices at the US market, well, these are blatant lies for sure, because what we're doing here could not impact domestic US market. They have other considerations. Well, what markets then, if not the US, those attacks could impact in the nearest future? Well, in the case of benzines, we are already affecting their domestic market, and the certain reduction of the volume of exports might cause some temporary and very local deficits elsewhere in the world. But if there's a deficit of fuel because Russia stopped exporting, well, then Indian producers will start exporting, because India now is #1 for Europe in terms of supplying ready oil products. Yeah, they've been processed from Russian oil, but Indian diesel is now filling in this niche quite easily. So when some people claim that the attacks of Ukrainian drones over Russian oil refinery industry causes escalation of oil prices at the global market, no, this is manipulation and this is not true. First of all, the Ukrainian drones are not attacking oil generating capacities. Nothing hits western or eastern Siberia oil deposits, right? But there is a slight increase of oil prices, that's true. And there are two reasons for that. Firstly, activities of Hussites in Bab el-Mandeb and Red Sea area. As a result, the traditional oil traffic that was using that route to get to Europe from Middle East has been redirected, and logistics prices increased, of course, because of that. And second reason, inability of Western coalition to deal with Hussites in the first place. And thus it keeps the oil prices at the higher levels. Realistically, this price should be like $10 less, at least. And when they start talking about some Ukrainian factor, no, that's manipulation, and these are blatant lies. Esteemed journalists, would you have any questions? Good afternoon. What about the sanctions? They do hit the Russian economy, right? And I'm talking here mostly about the secondary sanctions that started being introduced recently in addition to primary sanctions against the Russians themselves. So what would you say about that? Well, thank you. Sound question. Secondary sanctions, as we can see, could only strengthen the primary sanctions. And we remember that the sixth package has been introduced recently. And oil products sanctions were introduced in 2023. And so, yeah, Secondary sanctions would make life more difficult for Russia for sure, but it's not going to be fatal for them. We need to consider more robust reactions. So yeah, the oil prices did come up recently, and ultimately we should have expected that Russia reduces the volume of exports of raw oil, crude oil, but the Black Sea analytics show that crude oil Russian traffic increased in the Black Sea area actually. So it's quite obvious that the way the sanctions were supposed to operate, namely reducing the revenues into the budget of the country aggressor, and Russia does get less revenues, but not substantially less as we would have hoped. That's why I'm saying that we need to introduce more robust reactions and against Russians' manipulations with tankers. Because right now we can see that those oil tankers, they are under third-party flags, third country flags, but we all know that those tankers are selling Russian oil, so they switch off automatic identification. It takes them a couple of days to change the name, to change the flag, and then all of a sudden this tanker is out there, valid, legitimate, and you cannot go after it because all the paperwork is in order, and that's why could we do something about this? Of course. Every vessel that leaves the dock is assigned a unique registration number of the International Maritime Organization. It's like your birth certificate. You can change the flag, the owner of that vessel, the name of it, but the registration number stays forever. So it's important that we start imposing punitive sanctions against that registration number, not like now, when they just change the name, the owner, the flag. And that's all. You can avoid those sanctions just by investing slightly into a new paint to put on the new name.
Lorenzo Cremonesi for the Italia Daily Corriere della Sera. I have 3 questions. First question, you told us that between January and March, the Russian capacity of raffination in the refinery diminished of the 12.58% point. Correct me if I'm mistaken. If I understood well, it's
1265.
1265. Okay, that's good. 1265. So can you please be more specific? What do you mean? It's the total capacity of raffination to refine benzene, diesel, mazout, whatever, all these oil product by Russia? That's what you mean?
Yeah.
I was only talking about Rosneft. And Rosneft has 40% of the domestic Russian oil market and Russian oil capacities. So I was talking only about this one company. So in Rosneft's case, the drop was 12.65%. If we compare average daily volume of processing of oil in January and average daily processing volume of oil early March. This volume of processing is what produces benzene, diesel, and aviation fuel, jet fuel. That was what I was talking about. While in the case of other Russian companies, well, I just don't have those accurate figures available for you. All we managed to do is calculate how it impacted Rosneft, but this is the flagship company and it possesses the main refinery capacities, the ones that generate benzene, diesel, and jet fuel.
I insist, and I have an additional question, because you probably saw, especially Financial Times, all the press, international press, as you rightly point out in your introduction, wrote about this question because it's really very important. The valuation, the Financial Times, 2 times on article which appeared during the weekend, was that the total, not only Rosneft, the total capacity of Russia diminished 10%. Would you agree?
Sounds true, yeah, approximately. And but don't ask me to verify this figure. Nobody can verify it for you. And like I told you, Russia doesn't share any official statistics. Previously, a couple of years ago, for instance, they did publish some, and in specialized publications, the data about the volume of processing of oil, but they stopped doing that already. And not all of the companies reveal those data. These are commercially sensitive data. And like I said, previously I would have been able to give you more adequate and accurate picture. Well, it sounds like Financial Times had their own sources. And if those sources say 10% in general for all of the industry, well, it's rings the bell, sounds true, because for smaller companies like Bashneft, right? Well, there were no attacks on their assets at all. So basically, they have the same status quo. We hit the assets of Rosneft and Lukoil, and you can see the damage that was incurred for them. But in general, if you ask, for instance, what would be the forecast for the first 6 months of this year, I wouldn't tell you, because nobody knows how long it will take the Russians to repair the damage that our drones incurred. Something could be repaired probably in a couple of weeks. In other cases, it might take a couple of months. So, again, forecasts may differ, but objectively speaking, since we have ongoing attacks and things might change. And one thing is clear, the damage is already sensitive for Russia.
Let me to ask you the second question. The second question is, do you see any, you told us that the Russian keep all secret, but maybe you have some indication of a diminishing of Russian export because of these attacks? Because before you were talking about the capacity of refine the product. What about the export? Is there any problem or not yet?
For the time being, I cannot give you this figure on the volume of exports of oil products. Let me reiterate, oil products. What we can observe is that they introduce a ban on exporting benzene. Well, that's quite an indicator, a strong one, because like I told you, the room for maneuver of the Russian domestic market to substitute benzene that was exported to the Western markets from the assets that were damaged, well, they can substitute it with other refineries in the continental part of Russia. But the maneuverability in case of benzene is less than with diesel, for sure. But when you ask me about the volume, it's very difficult to give you any accurate figure. No details made available. and such data was considered to be commercially sensitive even in peace times, under normal circumstances, so to speak. But currently, we can see that Russia increased the volume of exports of crude oil, which actually indirectly suggests that hit hard because of our tax, and thus it gives them surplus crude oil that they cannot process, and they can have no storage capacities. They just have to sell it. And this is a very important component of our attacks because, yeah, it's true. Russia does have large reservoir capacities. For instance, Transneft company, right? This is a state-run Russian monopoly company that transports virtually all of the crude oil and most of the oil products using oil pipelines because that's the cheapest transportation system. So they do have some storage reservoirs, but only for operational volumes. They cannot store crude oil for long, and that's why the fact that they increase the export of crude oil is a direct indication that the Russian refinery industry is no longer able to process as much crude oil as before.
As an addenda to this question, can you tell us briefly what was the export of benzene before it was stopped? What it represented in the globality of the Russian export, energy export? 3%, 5%, 10%?
The volume of Russian exports of benzene, I cannot tell you off the top of my head, but what I can tell you for sure is that for Russia, those volumes were not that important in terms of getting revenues into a budget. Unlike exports of diesel. So the proportion was approximately this, roughly speaking. Exports of 1 ton of Russian benzene was 4 tons of diesel exported by Russia. So Russia exported 4 times more diesel than benzene, because when you process, refine oil, crude oil, you get more diesel out of it, less benzene, and even less jet fuel. So that's on the average how statistically it's happening. So the proportion is 1 to 4. 1 ton of or barrel of benzene, that's 4 tons of diesel that Russia can export in addition to. So, yeah, proportions might change, of course, but that's the figure that I know in terms of Russian exports.
Thank you. You answer very, very well. You say you didn't know, but you know very well. Sorry, sir, the last question is, and thank you for your patience. And the last question is, you mentioned, of course, you say the attacks, the Ukrainian attacks in the last weeks, in the last months, are around the border. We know that is on all public open sources, the most distant implant attacked in the last weeks by the Ukrainian drones against Russia was about 750 kilometers from the border. So can I ask you, in this range, 750, let's say 1,000, how much of the refineries are placed? Means, what is the potentiality of attack? How much the Ukrainian can damage of the total Russian raffination capacity? Because, of course, there are refineries which are after the Ural. In Vladivostok, you cannot attack Vladivostok, right? So what do you think? What is your estimation? How much of this Russian production, Ukraine at the end of, if tomorrow they will send, I don't know, 2,000 drones, how much they can destroy it?
Well, let me respond it this way. 4. out of 5 largest oil refineries of Russia are located in the zone that we can hit. And we have attacked all 4 of them already. So it's not the question of whether we find new targets. Yeah, we know about the new targets, of course, but it's all about keep hitting the targets that we already hit, and we plan to keep hitting them, because the most important thing, like I mentioned, is to be consistent and regular in those attacks. When a couple of drones hit the refinery, it cannot get it out of business completely, but our job is to hit the key technological devices of those refineries, which we do, but that doesn't mean that we completely damage and ruin the whole refinery. They can repair them in a while, but then we'll hit them again. That's the whole idea of this, of our strategy. So the progress achieved in the last, say, 2.5 months of those attacks, if we talk about this particular Rosneft company, well, we reached colossal progress. And if we keep doing what we're already doing, then by the end of the current year, probably even earlier, there will be the collapse of Russian refinery industry. That's quite realistic to expect. But we can also observe that they are becoming more active themselves in terms of adding air defense capabilities around those refineries that we're hitting. Also, they set jammers and electronic warfare, EW equipment. The refineries did have some of those weapons before, but our drones still did hit the refineries, and there is nothing original about this. If we look at how the Russian forces were operating from the very beginning of the full-fledged invasion into Ukraine 2 years ago, and how they are operating right now, well, they're doing the same way. They are trying to hit the Ukrainian refinery, for instance, with 10 drones. 1 or 2 hit, the rest we shot down. Then, next time, they send another 10 drones. Again, 1 or 2 hit the target, the rest we destroy, but those 1 or 2 drones still can do quite a damage, but we need to re-attack them, and that's what we're doing. We are systemic and regular with our attacks, because the first attacks on Russian refinery happened back in 2022, actually. The refineries that were located closer to the front lines and to the border of Ukraine. It's in the south of Russia, Krasnodar region. 2022, lots of attacks of those refineries. They had to shut down Novoshakhtinsk refinery in Rostov region, for instance, for quite a while. But still, the massive effect comes only now. But you're right, everything that is in the radius of 1,000 kilometers, and we're talking about various capacities, not necessarily giant plants that process 15-20 million tons like in Ryazan or Nizhny Novgorod or Yaroslavl or Pilsha. Now they have quite a number of smaller refineries, but they're not playmakers that play the most important role. That's why we'll keep hitting the largest targets. That's the priority. Thank you, Mykhailo. We were talking about the consequences of fires at the Russian refineries, and that was Mykhailo Gonchar, the president of the Center of Globalistics Strategy 21. Media Center Ukrinform will continue its work tomorrow. Stay with us.